You're listening to The Archetype Effect, conversations redefining power, purpose and leadership for women and the coaches who guide them. I'm Ros Cardinal, leadership coach and creator of the Women's Leader Archetypes. Together we'll explore the real stories, the research and reflections that help women rise with clarity and authentic power.
There's a moment in leadership that almost no one talks about. Not because it's rare, but because it's invisible, even when you're inside it. It usually happens in ordinary situations. A meeting that shifts tone slightly, a comment that lands differently than you expected, an email that feels loaded, even if you can't explain why. Nothing overt has happened, but something in you has already registered. This matters. And from that point, something very specific changes. You don't feel less in control. You feel clearer, more certain, more decisive, more aligned with what needs to happen. And that's why it's so hard to catch, because from the inside, nothing feels wrong. You're not overwhelmed. You're not panicking. You're not even particularly emotional. You're functioning. You're responding. You're leading. And yet, if you slow this moment down, a decision has already been made. Not consciously, your system has already decided what matters here, what might go wrong, what you need to do next. And once that decision is made, your range of response quietly narrows. You don't explore multiple options, you move towards one, the one that feels most obvious. But obvious here isn't coming from strategy, it's coming from safety. And this is the part that changes everything. Because when your nervous system is driving the decision, you don't experience that as fear. You experience it as instinct, as clarity, as good judgment, as leadership. So those moments don't get interrupted, they get reinforced. You act, it works, or at least it holds, and your system learns that's how we handle this. So the next time something similar happens, you get there faster. With less hesitation, less awareness, less choice. And over time, this becomes what you trust. Not consciously, but in your body. A way of leading that feels natural, even when it's costing you. And the cost isn't obvious. It doesn't show up as failure. It shows up as something more subtle. You're effective, but it's taking more effort than it used to. You're making decisions, but they feel tighter. You're responding well, but there's less space than there should be. This episode is about that moment. The moment your system takes over and reshapes how you think, decide, and lead, without you realising it. Not as a model, not as theory, but as something that is already happening in real time, in your day-to-day leadership. Because once you can see that moment, you start to see something else. Not just what you do under pressure, but when you stop choosing it. There's something important to understand here, and it's where most leadership advice goes off track. Because when you notice these moments, your instinct is usually to correct them, to slow down, to be more intentional, to make better decisions, to not react so quickly. In other words, to think your way back into control. But that assumes something that isn't quite true. It assumes that in those moments, you still have access to the same range of responses. And you don't. What changes first is not your behaviour, it's what feels available to you. In one moment, you might feel, I need to respond now. In another, I don't have the capacity to deal with this. In another, I need to stay across this. And in another, it's easier if I just go along with this. From the outside, these look like different behaviours, but underneath them, something consistent has happened. Your system has already decided what's safe here, what's risky, what will protect you in this moment. And based on that, it reorganises your options. Not consciously. You don't think, I'm removing these choices. They just stop feeling like real options. Pausing might technically be available, but it doesn't feel appropriate. Speaking up might be possible, but it doesn't feel worth it. Stepping back might be sensible, but it doesn't feel safe. So you don't choose between multiple paths. You move towards the one that feels viable, the one your system has already cleared. And this is why these patterns are so hard to interrupt, because you're not experiencing a range of choices. You're experiencing a single, coherent direction. One that feels reasonable, proportionate, even intelligent. And often it is. That's what makes this so subtle. You're not making irrational decisions. You're making constrained decisions. Decisions shaped by what your system has made available in that moment. And this happens very quickly, before you've had time to step back, before you've had time to reflect, before you've had time to question it. So when people say, just be more aware in the moment, what they're missing is this. In the moment, your system is faster than your awareness. It has already organised the field. So the shift we're making here is not about trying to override the response. It's about recognising when your options have narrowed. Because that's the moment where leadership changes. Not when behaviour becomes visible, but just before. When certain responses stop feeling possible and one path starts to feel inevitable. And once you start to see that, something important opens up. Not immediate control, but perspective. You begin to notice this is the option that feels available right now. Not necessarily this is the only option that exists. And that distinction is small, but it's where choice begins to return. There's a particular way this moment shows up for many women, not all, but many. It doesn't pull you back, it pulls you forward into action. And it starts the same way we talked about earlier. Something shifts. A tone, a delay, a piece of information that doesn't quite sit right. Nothing explicit, but your system has already registered. This matters. And almost immediately, something else changes. Time compresses. Not actual time, your experience of it. The space where you would normally pause, consider, let something unfold, disappears. And in its place is a very specific pull. Move, respond, decide, do something. And this doesn't feel like pressure. That's what makes it so hard to see. It feels like clarity. It feels like this needs to be handled. I'll just move this forward. I can see what's needed here. And because you're often right, or at least effective, nothing interrupts it. The conversation progresses. The decision gets made. The situation stabilises. From the outside, this looks like leadership. Decisive, responsive, on top of things. But if you slow it down just slightly, there's something else sitting underneath it. A quiet sense of risk. Not obvious risk, subtle risk. That if this sits too long, something might shift. If no one steps in, something might get missed. If you don't move, something might go off track. So your system solves for that quickly. It removes the pause. It narrows the field. It moves you towards action. And again, this feels like good judgment. Not because you've weighed every option, but because other options don't feel as available. Waiting doesn't feel neutral. It feels exposed. Letting something unfold doesn't feel strategic. It feels like something could slip. So you move. And over time, this creates a very particular identity in leadership. You become the person who keeps things moving. The one who doesn't let things stall. The one who steps in early. The one who responds quickly, often before others have fully processed what's happening. And this is rewarded. You're seen as capable, reliable, across things, competent, which reinforces the pattern. But there's a cost, and it's not obvious, because nothing is going wrong. Everything is moving, but internally something has changed. You're no longer choosing when to act. Action is choosing you. Pauses feel harder to access. Stillness feels less comfortable. Letting something sit feels like a risk you don't quite want to take. So even when nothing is urgent, your system prefers movement. And this is the part very few women see clearly. The issue isn't that you're decisive. It's that your decisiveness is no longer entirely chosen. It's being shaped by a system that has learned movement keeps things safe. And once you see that, you'll start to notice the moment before you act. The point where time compresses, where the pull to move appears. And for the first time, there's a fraction of space. Not to stop yourself, but to recognise this isn't just leadership, this is my nervous system. For some women, that moment doesn't lead to movement. It leads somewhere much quieter and much harder to recognise, because nothing obvious happens. You don't act. You don't respond. You don't push things forward. From the outside, it can look like delay, disengagement, something being left. But from the inside, it feels different. It feels like, I don't have it in me right now. I'll come back to that. I just need a bit of space before I deal with this. And at first, that can seem reasonable, even responsible, because you're not reacting, you're not rushing, you're not escalating anything unnecessarily. You're stepping back. But if you slow this moment down just slightly, something else has already happened. Your system has registered this is too much. Not objectively, but internally. Too much to step into, too much to hold, too much to engage with cleanly. And once that threshold is crossed, your access to action changes. Not disappears, but shifts. Things that would normally feel straightforward suddenly feel heavier. A conversation you would usually have without thinking feels like it needs more energy than you have. A decision you could make quickly feels like something you'd rather sit with. Even small actions can feel out of proportion. Not because they are, but because your system has already decided engaging fully here isn't safe enough. So instead of moving towards the situation, you move away from it. Gently, quietly, often without fully realising you're doing it. You close the document. You don't reply just yet. You tell yourself you'll think about it later. And again, this feels like a choice. It feels like, I'm just pacing this. I'll handle it when I have more capacity. This isn't the right moment. But underneath that, there's something more specific. It's not just that you don't want to act, it's that you can't quite access the version of you who would. The part of you that would normally step in, decide, move things forward. It feels just out of reach. And that can be confusing because you know you're capable of this. You've done it before, easily. So the mind tries to make sense of it. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I'm overthinking this. Maybe I just need to push through. But pushing through rarely works here because this isn't about motivation. It's about capacity. Your system has already pulled energy away from engagement to protect you. And the protection is very specific. If urgency protects you from things going wrong, withdrawal protects you from taking on more than your system can hold. So it reduces exposure, reduces involvement, reduces demand. And again, this is intelligent. It keeps you from tipping into overwhelm. But there's a cost. Because while you're pulling back, things don't stop. Decisions wait. Conversations linger. Work accumulates. And over time, that creates a different kind of pressure. Not the pressure to act quickly, the pressure of things sitting unfinished. And this is where self-judgment often enters. You start telling yourself, I should just deal with this. This isn't that hard. Why am I putting this off? But from the inside, it doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like a lack of access. as though the part of you that would normally engage isn't fully available. And once you see that, something shifts. Not immediately in behaviour, but in how you relate to what's happening. Instead of, why am I not doing this? The question becomes, what about this feels like too much right now? And that question is very different because it doesn't push you back into action. It brings you back into awareness. For some women, that moment doesn't create urgency. It doesn't pull you forward quickly, and it doesn't pull you back. It does something else. It draws everything inward. You stay engaged, you stay present, but something in how you relate to the situation changes. You start to gather it, the information, the context, the moving parts. You want to understand it fully, not superficially, completely. And this doesn't feel like control. It feels like clarity, like care, like making sure nothing important gets missed. So you lean in. You ask more questions. You refine what's being said. You hold on to details others seem comfortable letting go of. And often you're right to. You can see things others don't see. The nuance, the implications, the connections that aren't obvious yet. So your involvement deepens. But if you slow this moment down, just slightly, there's another shift underneath. A quiet tightening, not around speed, around certainty. A sense that this needs to be held properly, that it can't be left too loose, too open, too dependent on how others interpret it. And from there, something very subtle happens. You begin to hold more of it in yourself. Not all at once, just a little more than before. You keep the full picture in your head. You track what's been said and what hasn't. You stay across the details even when others step back. And again, this feels reasonable, even responsible, because from your perspective, something would be lost if you didn't. Not because others aren't capable, but because they don't quite see it the way you do. So instead of fully handing things over, you stay connected to it. You might still involve others, still collaborate, still ask for input, but there's a line you don't quite cross, a point where you think, I'll just hold this part. I'll keep an eye on that. It's easier if I stay across it. And over time that line moves. You hold a little more, then a little more again, until you're no longer just contributing to the system, you're stabilising it, quietly, from the inside. And this is where the pattern becomes difficult to see, because nothing is visibly wrong. The work is strong, the thinking is sound, the outcomes are often better because you're involved. From the outside, this looks like expertise. It looks like depth, ownership, high standards. But internally, something else is happening. Responsibility is concentrating, not because it's been given to you, but because it no longer feels safe to let it disperse. So you carry more of the meaning, more of the interpretation, more of the outcome. And with that comes a particular kind of pressure. Not urgency, not overwhelm, but containment. A sense that you need to stay across this, because if you don't, something important might shift, be missed, be diluted, be handled in a way that doesn't quite land. So you hold on to it. And the more you hold, the less others fully step in. Not because they don't want to, but because there's less space, which reinforces the pattern. I knew I needed to stay on this. It wouldn't have landed otherwise. And again, this works, but there's a cost. Because while you're holding the system together, you're also holding yourself inside it. Your attention stays engaged longer than it needs to. Your thinking doesn't fully switch off. Your sense of responsibility doesn't quite release. And over time, that becomes heavy. Not in an obvious way, just in a constant, low-level way, where you realise you're carrying more than you expected to. Not because you had to, but because letting go never quite felt like a real option. And once you see that, something shifts. Not immediately in what you do, but in how you understand it. Instead of, this is just the way I work, You start to notice, I feel safer when I'm holding this. And that awareness is subtle, but it matters because it opens a different kind of question. Not, how do I let go? But what feels at risk if I don't hold this myself? And for some women, that moment doesn't feel like something needs to be held. It doesn't feel like something needs to be acted on. It feels like something needs to be smoothed. You're still engaged, still present, still part of what's happening, but your attention shifts away from the task and towards the people in the room. You start noticing tone, reactions, what's landing and what isn't. And this doesn't feel effortful, it feels natural, almost automatic. You might even describe it as empathy. Being able to read the room, pick up on what's not being said, sense when something feels off. And that part is real. But if you slow this down, just slightly, there's something more specific happening underneath it. You're not just noticing how people feel, you're tracking it continuously, as if part of you is asking all the time, is this still okay? Is everyone comfortable? Is anything about to shift? And that tracking doesn't switch off. It stays on while you're speaking, while you're listening, while decisions are being made. So instead of just participating in the conversation, you're also managing the emotional environment around it, quietly, in real time. And from there, your response changes. You soften how you say something. You adjust your wording mid-sentence. You let a point go that you might otherwise have held. But it doesn't stop there, because this pattern doesn't just show up in conversation. It shows up in what you take on. Someone asks you to do something, and before you've really checked in with yourself, you've already said yes. Not strategically, automatically. It doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like the natural response. You tell yourself, it's quick. It's easier. It's not worth pushing back on. Or you look at your team and decide not to delegate. Not because they can't do it, but because you're already aware of what they're carrying, how stretched they are, what pressure they might be under. So you keep it yourself. I'll just do this one. I'll take this piece. It's easier if I handle this. And again, this feels like care, like being thoughtful, like being fair. So you adjust. You redistribute things quietly onto yourself. And often that doesn't show up immediately. It shows up later. Working a bit longer than you planned. Holding on to things that weren't originally yours. Carrying both the work and the emotional weight around it. And this is the part that's rarely named. You're not just managing tasks, you're managing how everyone feels about the tasks. Whether they're okay, whether they're comfortable, whether anything is becoming tense or strained. And that's a lot to carry. Even if you don't consciously think of it that way, because your system has learned, if the environment stays smooth, you stay safe inside it. So it does what it's been trained to do. It scans, it adjusts, it keeps things steady. By adjusting you, not the situation, you. And this is where the pattern becomes difficult to see because nothing feels wrong. You're still contributing, still engaged, still helping things move forward. But something has shifted. You've left yourself out of the equation. Your preference, your capacity, your limits. Not ignored, just bypassed. And over time that happens earlier, faster, more automatically. You say yes before you've checked. You take things on before they're fully yours. You carry more than you consciously agreed to. Not because you have to, but because it feels easier than disrupting the moment. Safer than introducing tension. And again, this is intelligent. It protects connection. It keeps things workable. But there's a cost, because while you're keeping everything smooth externally, something internally is being deferred. Not once, but repeatedly. And it's subtle. You notice it later, a sense that your day filled up without you choosing it, that you're holding things you didn't intend to hold, that you're more tired than the work alone would explain. And the instinct is to dismiss it. It's fine. It's just part of the role. It was easier this way. But if you look a little closer, there's something more precise happening. It's not just that you're being collaborative. It's that your system has decided keeping everyone else okay matters more than including yourself in the decision. So it adjusts you to make that happen. And once you see that, something changes. Not immediately in what you do, but in how you recognise it. Instead of, I'm just being empathetic, you start to notice, I'm making sure everything feels safe by changing myself. And that awareness is quiet, but it matters because it brings you back into the moment, back into the question of, what do I actually want here? And that question doesn't force change. It simply includes you again. If you step back from everything we've just explored, there's something quite simple sitting underneath it. These aren't different kinds of leaders. They're different ways your system keeps you safe in moments that don't quite feel safe. And most of the time, you don't see the moment it happens. You see the behaviour, the urgency, the hesitation, the control, the adjustment. But what you don't usually see is the point just before that, where something in you decides, this is how I need to be here. This is how I need to show up. And once that decision is made, everything that follows feels natural. It feels like you, like your style, your judgment, your way of leading. But what you might be starting to notice now is that it's not fixed. It shifts, depending on what your system is reading in the moment. Sometimes you move forward quickly. Sometimes you might pull back. Sometimes you hold everything together. Sometimes you adjust to keep things smooth. This isn't random, and it's not because something's wrong. It's because your system has learned over time how to keep you safe in different kinds of pressure. And when you see that, something changes, not in what you do immediately, but in how you experience yourself while you're doing it. There's a moment, small but important, where you notice, this isn't just me choosing. This is something in me responding. And that awareness doesn't stop the response, but it creates space around it. Space to see it, space to feel it, space to realise there might be more available here than it feels like in the moment. And that's where this starts to change, not by forcing yourself to be different, not by correcting your behaviour, but by recognising the moment where your system narrows what feels possible. Because once you can see that, you're no longer completely inside it. You're relating to it. And that's the beginning of choice returning. Not fully, not all at once, but enough. Enough to pause where you didn't pause before. Enough to notice what you would have missed. Enough to start asking a different question. What would this feel like if I didn't have to respond this way to stay safe? And that question isn't something you answer quickly. It's something you sit with. Because what lies underneath it is something we haven't explored yet. What happens when the pressure itself changes? When it's not just the moment that feels loaded, but the role you're in, the expectations you're holding, the visibility that comes with it. When power itself starts to feel different, not like capacity, but like something much heavier, something you have to carry. That's where we're going next.
Thanks for joining me on the Archetype Effect. If this episode sparked an insight, share it with a woman who leads, or leave a review so more women can find these conversations. Until next time, lead with purpose and power that feels like you.